Thank you, Vice Chancellor, and again, thanks for making the university so welcoming for us all today. Ladies and gents, the theme of this conference is loosely the effects of COVID on policing, and in particular, the relationship between police and community. But our speakers aren't tied to that theme, but it will be a recurring theme. It's also about change, and one of the big changes in UK policing is the introduction of policing degrees, if we can put it that way, which the university here is at the forefront. So it's also about change in policing, and COVID has perhaps accelerated some of those changes. And somebody who's been at the forefront of change, certainly in policing, with the advent of direct entry, is our first speaker of the day, who's here really to welcome us, Chief Superintendent Peter Gardner. Peter was, until Friday, the PCU commander for West Area, so a large chunk of West London in which this university sits. And Peter has been a great friend of the London Policing College and the university in pushing forward a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. But Peter has fast become the Met's Mr. Fix-It, so he has now moved across into a new command, really around detention and the way the Met manages prisoners and where prisoners are processed and so on. So another huge challenge for Peter. A hugely interesting background in his own right, but I'm not going to steal any of his thunder. So Peter, the floor is yours. The mic is yours when you can stand behind the lectern.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Honoured guests, colleagues, it's a pleasure to be able to address you today at this, the third International Police Education Conference. This is also the first year where our policing recruits are coming through the police, I think it's Police Education Qualifications Framework, which is quite a mouthful, or policing degrees, or the PEQF, as we've started calling it. So we're embarking on a new era for policing, an era of consistency and of accreditation, backed by solid qualifications. It provides a standardized approach to officer development and training, will help officers reach their potential and recognize the professionalism and capability that our officers operate at. For millennials and Generation Z, or for those of you who subscribe to such notions, the idea of spending an entire career in a single occupation or for a single employer is a very alien one. Policing is less likely to be a job for life, less likely to be a lifelong vocation. Traditional policing careers are less likely to be attractive to these generations. If we are to attract the brightest and the best, those that will carry our organizations forward long after you and I are hopefully enjoying a well-earned retirement, we have to adapt and change. We have to have an offering that is compelling, that will continue to attract the very best. I believe PEQF does that. It's an amazingly attractive offer. A degree, practical experience, a salary whilst you're studying, and a guaranteed job. Gone are the days of leaving university with a pile of debt and scratching around wondering what you're going to do next. It is an incredible opportunity for those who are leaving school, those who are looking for a career that is beyond the average. Importantly, police officers will obtain a recognized qualification that they can take with them in these days of a more transient workforce. The London Policing College is an integral part of delivering this, and I thank you all and the university here for the effort and determination that you have put in to making this work. I strongly believe that the introduction of PEQF provides us with an incredible opportunity to bridge the gap between operational policing and academic theory. It is an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss. Remembering my own days at university and some of my nights out, when as the local operational policing commander, I was somewhat apprehensive when told there's going to be a bunch of students at the university running around carrying warrant cards. It certainly gave me pause for thought. But I realized very quickly, as I found out more about the program, that my fears were very unfounded, my apprehension misplaced. and instead replaced with an optimism over the possibilities on offer. I consider first the opportunity for students, how we can work together to give them the experience of the busiest policing command in London, to develop them, to get them actively involved in our work as they study, to build a cadre of better experienced, more effective policing recruits that can really hit the ground running, to expose them to the reality as well as the theory of policing, to give them a solid foundation for their future careers. It's obvious, but the effectiveness of the services we deliver is dependent on the quality of the individuals delivering them. Looking to the future, the more experienced and qualified these officers are, the better service we can provide for London. I'm truly excited. Naturally, I also consider the benefit to us as a service, not only of well-qualified, more effective probationary officers, but the opportunities of fresh perspectives on how we do things, research and projects that we can partner on, how we can embed best practice, best evidence, and theory in all that we do. We are not an organization that can or does stand still. On the West Area Policing Command alone, we're running 5 different randomized controlled trials, 3 of which are on level 5 of the Maryland scale, for those of you of an academic persuasion. These are in the areas of hotspots, offender management, domestic abuse, recidivism, and stop and search. The need to work off best evidence, of effective and well-researched policy and practice is imperative. As we embed our practices in this best evidence, the link between academic research and operational policing needs to grow and become second nature. The theme of this conference is very much about policing through COVID-19. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to reflect on some of the key lessons I learned trying to steer my command through this unprecedented challenge over the last few years. I promise I'll try and keep it short. My first inkling of this virus emerging from China in early 2020 was when my sister visited from Hong Kong. She explained to me the challenges that we're facing and the panic and alarm that this was driving through the community. To be fair, at the time, my only actions were to buy a few packets of face masks and order some gel online. But it did make me think about the preparedness of our organization. At the time, I had just finished a role as a frontline policing commander for Brexit, where I'd coordinated our response and that of London's 32 local authorities for multiple scenarios: food shortages, fuel shortages, public disorder, and so forth. I therefore naively thought that we were well prepared for the next, what I thought was really the next iteration of bird flu. However, very quickly over the next few weeks, the situation developed at an unrelenting pace. And by March, we were facing our first lockdown. The first lesson I learned was that in the absence of information, communication is key. Rumors were everywhere, and misinformation was filling a void in the absence of facts. We are often learning of developments at the same time as the public. We were hearing things when the Prime Minister was making announcements without forewarning and expected to develop strategies to adapt to that. We were scared too, but we still had a job to do. In my mind, I was thinking, if I do not know how to keep my officers and staff safe, how on earth can they keep the public safe? An early decision, and perhaps one of the best we made, was to establish a COVID cell on our BCU, headed by an experienced inspector with a team of 6 officers around him. Similarly, a COVID cell was established within our central command team, and that was reflected also in the launch of Optala at a national level, which I'm sure you'll hear more about today. The cell became a center of knowledge and reference, open doors for everybody who wanted to ask anything, providing accurate and timely information 24/7, answering queries, coordinating our activities, ensuring information was disseminated. A daily rhythm was established, and every day I sent out a briefing to all my officers and staff to be really clear about what we know, what we don't know, the facts that had been established, the protocols and policies that we needed to follow, the status of PPE, practical advice, and so forth, including advice not just about policing, but for our families and friends at home. It became a moment of clarity in a storm and wrestled control over rumor and speculation. It was not easy, as I said, as we often find about policy changes when announced on TV, but it became a beacon of reference for our officers and provided a lot of clarity and stability to our command. The second lesson was that even in the face of the most severe threat, there's opportunity to be found. As we entered the first lockdown, my key considerations were around resilience, reviewing contingency and fallback plans. What services would we as a command have to stop offering if we lost 20% of our workforce, 30%, 50%? These were considerations that we hadn't really encountered before. It was a very trying time. We were playing catch up in many senses as the situation was moving so fast. In reality though, what we found was that demand for our services was reduced by significantly more than the expected loss of capability. This gave us a unique opportunity as we effectively had a significant increase in capacity. This was unprecedented, certainly in my short time in policing, but we did not hang around. In 2019, we averaged just under 6,000 sanction detections a month. In March, April, and May of 2020, the average was over 9,000 a month. We had space, we had time, we put the effort into doing our job. Lockdown gave criminals no place to hide, and we knew where many of them were. They were locked up at home. Our cells were never busier. In May 2020, we had just under 14,000 detainees in our cells, which is more than 1,500 above average. Arrests for drugs offences, which is often a proxy for police proactivity, almost doubled between March and May 2020. While the sun shone, we made hay. The third and clearest lesson was the need to work together across all public agencies. The bonds between police, the NHS, Public Health England, the Fire Brigade, and local authorities were tested like never before. We survived because we recognized the need to work closely together from the start. What was done centrally at a government level was reflected locally at a borough level. Bi-weekly strategic command meetings chaired by the local authority chief executive were implemented. All local heads of key services attended. Our response was collective, organized, and effective. This was mirrored by tactical meetings at an operational level, and the results were staggering in terms of partnership working. We had police officers and firefighters driving ambulances. Parking restrictions were lifted across all the boroughs for key workers. PPE, or public protective equipment, was collectively shared where there were shortages. It truly felt like a wartime effort. Bonds were forged and strengthened during this period that have led to significantly more coordination in all areas of policing and public harm going forward. The collective responsibility of responding to the pandemic bodes well for the future of partnership working across all statutory services. I'd like to leave you with perhaps the most impactful and powerful lesson I learned as a leader, and that is to never underestimate the strength of human spirit and determination that our officers and staff are capable of. Throughout the pandemic, we put ourselves at significant risk, yet we never had a shortage of volunteers for the most onerous of tasks. It came at a huge personal sacrifice. We lost colleagues to the virus. We lost friends and we lost family. Yet we never stopped putting ourselves forward. At the start of the pandemic, whilst the world collectively fought itself for PPE and we had shortages, officers still put themselves forward and went into situations without protection because we had no choice. We can't stand back. We cannot not get involved. When we needed officers to respond and to attend quarantine sites where we knew the virus was present, I never had a lack of people putting themselves forward. We established pandemic multi-agency response teams, or PMOT teams as they were called, made up of police officers, fire officers, and members of the NHS community. They responded to calls that had been identified by the London Ambulance Service as potentially COVID-19 linked deaths. It was effectively body recovery and investigation for COVID-19 fatalities. It was terrible work. Yet I never had a shortage of volunteers who put themselves forward. They attended sudden deaths in the community day in, day out, at considerable personal risk, both physically from the virus and mentally in terms of what they faced. When those we loved and cared about became ill, we rallied, we supported families, children, parents, and partners. As a police officer, I've never been prouder. We can plan and we can mitigate and we can manage, but ultimately it is human endeavor that will triumph, because every strategy, operational decision, or order is undertaken by people. People like yourselves, our colleagues, those that are prepared to sacrifice everything for the greater good. And that is the key lesson I will never forget, and one for which I will forever be grateful. Thank you very much.